Hello, it's Charlene Lee here, and I am going to be talking today about the fallacy of control. And control is a really big issue, especially these days when we're feeling in so many ways out of control. And so let's talk about control and why it is such an important thing to us, because from an early age, we've been doing everything that we can to try to be in control. And so when you're thinking about trying to be in control, it's things like, okay, I want to be able to control standing up, feeding myself, choosing the clothes I get to wear. And also just as we grow up, trying to be more and more independent. And then we start going to school, we start working, and guess what happens? We have to be squished back into a box again. And we're being told, you don't really actually have a lot of control in your life. And even as we move into leadership, it's all about, in many ways, this hierarchical approach, the way that we've always been taught, the way leadership works, which is command and control. You've probably heard of that term. You probably feel a lot of it, especially if you're working in most organizations where it's a very traditional kind of hierarchy. People sit at the top, spreads out into the various workers at the front lines. And what I want to talk about today is how this is an outdated notion that we need to be in command and control in our relationships and work and in business and in our communities and our lives, because there's this need and this sense to have to be in control. And this is why I call it the fallacy of control, because it simply is this. It really is a fallacy. You're not actually in control. If you think about it, what do you really control? Do you control the fact that people get work done, or the fact that they show up at a particular time and place to do their work? That's not true. In fact, I think in many ways, what we are trying to do is we have this need to be in control, because this is a very human aspect of trying to control our circumstances. And here's the thing. I think the more that you actually try to assert your control, the more that people who you are trying to control rebel against you. They don't want it. Because face it, how many of us really like to be controlled? I know I don't. I would much rather be inspired to do the work that we are together driven through a common sense of purpose and of service to get this work done. That is going to be so much more aspirational. You're going to get so much more out of me if you look at it from that point of view, rather than trying to control me. So I think what we're seeing over the past couple of years, over the past decade or so, is this new form of leadership. And I wrote about it in a book I published a decade ago. I think in some ways it was ahead of its time, called Open Leadership. And it is about this concept, about giving up control. So I think in so many ways, the key thing here is about how do you learn to give up the control that, frankly, you never, ever had. So I keep going back to this is not something that is a natural thing for us. And what I want to do is talk today about what that looks like. One ways to think about this is putting leadership instead of this control kind of aspect into the context of a relationship. And I love this quote from Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner from their wonderful book. Is a classic book called Leadership Challenge. And they write, leadership is a relationship between those who aspire to lead and those who choose to follow. And this has been the crux of much of the work that I do around leadership and organizations, because I think this whole idea of trying to control somebody is just not the way true leadership works. If you think about the best leaders that we've ever had, think about the best leader you've ever had the privilege to work with. Were they in control of you? Did you feel like you were in a control kind of relationship? Absolutely not. And even think about the best relationships in your life. Think about the relationships if you have the wonderful chance to be with a partner or a spouse, or with your children, or with your best friends. Are those control relationships? I know that if I ever thought that I was in control of my relationship with my partner or my spouse, it would not fly at all. So why do we think that we have to be in control in our work relationships? So I keep coming back to this idea that we need to be in a place where we think much more strategically, much more holistically about how we think about control. And we need to have a different approach to this. So the question becomes, how do we do this in our work lives? How do we do this as leaders? Because this is not something that comes really naturally to people. And so I just wanted to show you just some questions to be thinking for yourself. One of the first ones is, how open do you need to be? If you want to be in a not control relationship, if you're not going to be controlling, then the flip opposite side of that is, how do I be open? And frankly, this is a hard question to answer. It was a question that I was trying to answer with a book, because an executive came to me and said, okay, I get it. I need to be more open and transparent and not be in control. So just tell me, what's the formula? What is the answer? And I had to say to him, well, it really says, how fast do you want to go? How much trust do you want to have in that relationship? Because the more you give up that control, you give up that need to be control, it means that you're putting more trust into that relationship. And people are going to be able to take on more, be more responsible, be more accountable, and you will be able to do so much more and so many things faster. So how much trust do you need to have in your organization, in the relationships, to go at the speed that you need to, frankly, at the speed of your customers? And I keep coming back to this question because in the end, I think we, in so many ways, need to be thinking about, how do we become better leaders? How do we actually give up that control? And I'll just go back one other area into the work that I did around the open leadership. And that is to define it, because this gives us some clues about how do you actually become a better leader. And I define this by thinking about it from an open leadership perspective. This is a definition of that. And that is having the confidence and the humility to give up the need to be in control, while inspiring that commitment from the people around you to accomplish the goals. So there's a lot packed into here, and I just want to point out two key things. There is this attribute around being confident and having humility, which are not words that you see necessarily next to each other. But confidence says, I have confidence in my team, in myself, that when we are open with each other, when we have this strong relationship, that it's going to work. And when it doesn't, our relationship is strong enough that we can have those difficult conversations. And humility says, I know I can't do this by myself. I am not the only person who has the answers here. My job as a leader isn't to know all the answers. It is to say, this is the direction. I'm going to ask the questions to guide us along the way, and together we will find the answers. And the other part about this is about accomplishing goals. I think one of the biggest fallacies around being open is that you just let everything fly. You just let everything go, and hopefully everybody finds a way. And that is not what happens. The best open leaders are really clearly defining what our objectives are. So if you've ever been an artist or a writer, and the worst thing in the world to do is to just have a blank canvas in front of you with no direction, no constraints whatsoever. It's the constraints that really inspire greatness. To say, this is the direction we want to go. This is what we want to accomplish. And within that, let's go for it. You'll define what that sandbox looks like. And that is such an important aspect of this. Being open, letting go of control, actually requires that you put in more structure, more clarity into how we will be open. You actually have to work harder to not be in control, which is kind of mind-blowing. When I was doing this research, I found that the best open leaders, and frankly, even with my latest book, The Disruption Mindset, the best disruptive companies are incredibly well-run, incredibly structured, have a lot of process, so that you don't have to worry about how work gets done. You're thinking about getting amazing, great, audacious work done against those great goals. So what I want to talk a little bit about now is, after having established, so this is what it looks like. How do you actually do this? What are the new rules for open leadership? And how do you actually do this? How do you actually give up control? So I want to just throw up here just a few things that I've seen along the way. And this first part is to, first of all, respect that your customers, your employees, the people who you are trying to build relationships have power. And it is this strong sense of respect that has to be there. And then you're constantly sharing in order to build that trust. And this is the hardest part because I hear from business leaders constantly, well, I know I need to share a lot more, but I don't want to talk about my personal life. I really want to keep my personal life over here and the professional life over here. Well, for all of us who have been trying to work from home and balance all this craziness, we know that has just gone completely out the window. The reality is we are complex humans. And the more that we can admit that we have these tensions in our lives, the sooner we can admit to say, this is what's going on in my life. This is what's working. This is what's not working. And as a leader, to share and to show that you're not perfect. You have this sense of humbleness, of humility, that you need other people to be part of that team, really helps develop that relationship. And the way I put it, especially, I think for professional women, it's hard sometimes to share about personal because we don't want to be seen as necessarily and stereotyped into the frazzled mom kind of situation. And this is how I've oftentimes talked about my kids. And I don't talk about them from a very specific name point of view. I don't talk about necessarily the things that they have done. I like to say I don't talk about what I had for lunch. What I do talk about are the things that inspired me from my relationships, from the things that happened along the ways, things that happen in my daily life that are meaningful to me and how they help me think about my role as a leader, about our job as a team and how we can move things forward. We as humans think about stories. And so for us to be able to share stories as a leader is a crucial thing to do. And then other quick things is to nurture the sense of curiosity and humility. I do believe that holding openness accountable is extremely important, which is if you're going to let go of control, give people the responsibility, then make sure you're putting in place the ability to, I would like to say, trust and verify that the work is being done. And then finally, one of the most debilitating things I find in relationships is when there is a strong sense that we have to be perfect, that there is no room for failure. And we know that there are absolutely no relationships that are perfect. If any of you who are listening here, if you want to raise your hands and say that you're in a perfect relationship, let's have a talk, because no relationship is perfect. So why do we in our work life pretend that everything has to be perfect too as well? So the sooner we can say we expect things to not always work out, we're not expecting things to fail, but we want things to succeed. But we know that failure, mistakes, learnings are inevitable. So let's learn how to embrace those. The last thing I want to just talk a little bit about and open up is this whole idea of managing up. This is something I hear from people for a lot, especially right now, because I've been doing a lot of work and asking people, what's holding you back from being more disruptive? What's holding you back from being more innovative? And oftentimes I hear is, I have a manager up here who just doesn't get it. They're a control freak. And I don't know how many of you have ever worked with one, but I have had quite a few bosses who are sticking their fingers into everything that is going on. So one of the things I talk about in managing up, especially if you're front lines or if you're somewhere in the middle, even if you're in a CEO, I was talking to a CEO who had one board member who was just constantly on his back and micromanaging everything. And this is what I recommend. And that is for a couple of things. Understand where that person is coming from, where that leader is coming from, what are their top objectives, because you cannot begin to build a relationship with them and have that openness in that relationship unless you really understand what's driving them. And then this is the really, really hard part. You're probably really angry and resentful and feeling like this person just has it out for everybody in the world. You have to set that aside. And you have to be curious and have empathy for this person to understand what their situation is. How are they looking at the world? because until you have empathy for them, and this is more than compassion, this is really standing in their shoes, looking at things from their perspective. You have to be curious about what's driving them, because until you can have empathy for them, you can't build a relationship based on trust with them. And this is the hardest thing to do. I know it because I come home from work sometimes and I just want to bang my fist against the wall and just say, this person is driving me crazy. I hate them. I just don't want to be working with them. And you need to set that aside, take a deep breath, and say, what's going on with them? What is going on? And then I'll go back the next day. I'm like, look, we didn't leave things in a good position yesterday. What's going on? I mean, it seems like things are tough. Talk to me about this. And it's amazing when you can have these conversations, no matter how difficult they are. But I don't think you can give up on that relationship, give up on that person who doesn't know how to let go of control until you have these conversations. Because in the end, what you have to be able to do is to build trust. Build trust from that sharing, being accountable for advancing those objectives that the person has, to build the trust so that they will eventually feel comfortable giving up some of that control and handing it over to you. This is what I think is the hardest part of being a leader. And I mean being a leader, especially when you don't have a title, when you don't have what I call the titular power, the structural power in an organization. But you are being a leader simply by showing up and having these conversations. You are leading and managing up. And believe me, you are acting as a leader and practicing leadership skills by helping your leader be a better leader. So I encourage you to think about how you would actually do these things. And I think especially now that we are in this COVID situation, we are feeling so out of control. And one of the best ways to get back that control is to really think about what we can have. And I keep going back to, what did we really control back when before COVID actually happened? I know that from talking to leaders that one of the biggest issues about working from home is that they didn't want to approve it. They didn't want to do it because they were afraid of losing control, of having the workers and their employees not in the same place physically anymore, and actually remote someplace else where they couldn't see them actually getting the work done. And my challenge has always been, well, what do you think they're doing if they're not at work? Do you think that they're goofing off? Well, we found out pretty quickly when shelter in place got put in place, and we instantly had to close our offices and scatter to the winds and staying in our homes and work. So especially for leaders in a situation where their entire teams are now remote from them, they've had to suddenly face the reality that they weren't in control in the physical sense. And guess what happened? They learned how to communicate, develop these relationships, transition into a work from home situation. So I'm often asked, what's going to happen when we reopen? Are we going to go back to our offices? Are we going to stay working at home? I think fundamentally we have achieved a completely different step order in terms of what leadership looks like. And if you think about the workplace, we have always defined the workplace as a physical location. And I think what we see now, that working from home, what has proven is that the workplace is not a physical location. It is defined by the relationships that we have with each other. And it's defined by the strength of having a good workplace, by how good these relationships are. And a toxic workplace is a place where these relationships are not strong, where there is a command and control situation, where people are told to shut up and do your work and don't ask questions. I think in this new environment, that's not going to be tolerated. We're going to have to develop new models of leadership where we are basing the relationships that we have, again, on a completely different model. And my hope is that this is going to be a model that you can feel comfortable with and understand, and also learn to practice, because this is not a natural thing that we are doing. So I just want to take a quick look at some of the questions here. So give me a second. This is always a tough part because I'm trying to talk and I'm trying to look at the questions too as well. So let's see. While I'm doing that, I want to just put up some information about some events coming up. I am doing a manifesto writing workshop on Thursday. So if you're watching this live or on Wednesday, I'm doing one tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And so you can go and visit and see that. So I know there was a question here. Let's see. When you're saying losing control, do you mean to be more proactive and adaptive? Yes, I do mean that. So thank you for that question, Mohammed. One of the biggest things about giving up control, about losing control, you can think about this as something that's happening to you because people are working away from you or the circumstances are changing. Or you can think about it as something you're doing proactively. That you may be in a command and control situation where people are used to getting orders from you, so they go off and do things. When you begin to let go of control, it's going to be a little bit wonky, frankly, because people may be used to getting the instructions from you. They're waiting for you to develop this. And so what you want to be doing is proactively saying, okay, everyone, we're going to be working in a different way. Instead of me starting the meeting and running the meeting, I'd like you all to be proactive. And I think about it as when you give control to somebody, when you give responsibility to somebody, they may not be ready to do this. So in the very beginning, you may say, instead of me just coming up with the solutions, I want you to come to the next meeting with ideas and solutions. And then next time you move forward, well, I'd like you to choose the best one. Come back with the reasonings and do the research to choose the best one. I like your recommendation. And then next time, okay, you make the decision this time. You're fully capable. We've talked through all the decisions. What do you think is the best way to do it? Now come up with a plan to put it in place and then be accountable. So you're loosening up those reins of control, handing it over to people, but in a very structured way. So I think that's some of the questions there, but I'll talk about one other quick thing. And that is, as you're thinking about going back into as we're opening up, as sheltering in place is ending, one last thing I would encourage you to think about is how you can be really proactive in thinking about what these relationships will look like. How are you going to continue to communicate? Because even if you go back into that physical space, my strong recommendation is to take the practices that you've had and developed from working remotely from each other. Things like taking an extra effort to reach out to people, to make sure you're communicating and staying on the same page. I like to say that the best practices of virtual work, of remote working, are things that we should take back into our co-located working places too as well. Because the best practices of working remotely from each other are things that really help you share information, make sure that everyone is on the same page. You're communicating extra hard to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And we tend to get kind of lazy about that when we're in the physical space with each other. The best practices I've seen from organizations who are moving very quickly, these disruptive organizations, is that they take those practices that distributed teams have and apply them across the board, regardless whether people are remote, sitting next to you on the same floor, or even just a floor above you. Because these are the practices, again, that allow you to give up control because you're confident now that everyone has all the information that they need to have. You're confident because everybody is putting into an open place, in a transparent place, everything that they're working on. So you can see that everyone is performing. Everyone has all the resources they need. And you can also see very early on when somebody's having problems. And so this is where giving up control is possible when you have openness, when you have transparency, and people are sharing the information that you need to be confident that everybody is doing their work. So I want to close out by just again reiterating my main theme here, in that it's a fallacy and a mistake to always be focusing on this fact that you have to be in control. And the reality is you've never been in control. And the sooner you can understand that and start working and thinking and leading in a different way, a way that respects the fact that people want to be in a very different type of relationship, that they don't thrive when they're in a command and control situation. I think the sooner we can work towards that and develop that, the better kind of organizations, the ones that are going to thrive in this fast changing, highly uncertain, tumultuous world that we are living in today. So I want to wish you all the best. And thank you again so much for watching. And I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. Have a good day.